Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Science of Climate Solutions with the Delaware County Institute of Science. My name is Laura Gurton. I'm a volunteer with the Delaware County Institute of Science in Media, Pennsylvania. I'm also a professor of earth science at Penn State Brandywine. And I want to welcome you to our final session before we take a break for the summer. We have been each month looking at the various sectors with Project Drawdown and looking at different solutions towards what's going on with climate science. And I will quickly just give a shout out to the quilt that's next to me. For those of you that have been returning month after month, I've been displaying a different quilts I have made relating to each of the drawdown sectors. So if you want a sneak peek at the rest of the quilts that match to different climate solutions, there's a URL at the bottom here, bit.ly/drawingdown tour. That'll give you a virtual museum tour of these quilts. One way, again, that we can use to communicate science, not just through lectures, we can also use art as well. And because we are talking about drawdown, I do want to take a moment and actually share my screen because there were some questions on the registration form asking about, again, what is Project Drawdown? So Project Drawdown is a nonprofit organization that researches. They look for ways that we can actually address the increase that we're seeing in greenhouse gases and what are the efforts that we can take to actually reverse those carbon dioxide emissions. What are the different pathways? What are the different suggestions for how we can move towards that? And so underneath, if we're on the main page, drawdown.org, you can see that there are various sectors that are here. And so each month we've been having a webinar relating to the various sectors. So we had started with an overview with Matt Scott from Project Drawdown, who introduced us to the entire program. Then we looked at the electricity sector. We looked at food, agriculture, and land use last month. And then for this evening's lecture, we are looking at the industry sector. And so when we look at the industry sector, what does that mean? That might be something that doesn't sound very exciting, but it is so important for what's going on. And I'll just scroll down a little bit here in the industry sector. And there's a question on this page. How can we improve industrial processes and materials produced? How can industry make use of waste and move forward flows of substances that are efficient and circular? This is incredibly important when we think about how much we produce and maybe how we can repurpose or reduce all of that to, again, address what's going on with emissions. And so within Project Drawdown, these are not a finite set of solutions, but these are just different categories, different areas of research. You see here composting, bioplastics, alternative cement, methane digesters. Again, not an exhaustive list, but you'll be hearing about work done in some of these units this evening. So I'm going to stop my sharing and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first presenter. We have two presenters this evening. I am thrilled for us to have AJ Tabzulu. She is at the Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson, and she's going to give us a little bit more about her background in biochemistry and how that actually relates to what she's doing with biology and plastics. So AJ, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's great talking about some of the science that I did over the past few years, and it's always fun to talk about, one's PhD research. Even though right now I'm in Janssen R&D, my PhD was focused on degradation of plastics using biological sources. So today I'm going to give a brief talk about what I did for my PhD and how that relates to some of the industry work that is going on. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Hopefully you guys can see my screen now. Great. So the focus of my PhD was on what I like to call plastic eaters. What we were trying to do at my previous place of work, NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, we were trying to engineer microorganisms and enzymes to help solve plastics problem. I got my PhD in Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana, but my work was mostly done in NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, located in Golden, Colorado, which is not uh, far away from Bozeman. Um, and as we all know, plastics do have a high environmental cost. Amount of plastic that is recycled is really, really low. We produced more plastic in the 21st century than the 20th century, all combined. Truckload of plastic waste enters into the ocean every second. And all of these issues highlight something that is very, very important. We need sustainable solutions to address the plastics production problem. And uh, on top of the plastics production problem that we have, microplastics issues getting worse. What we have microplastic pieces that are in our drinking water, in our food, and even in the air. We eat, drink, and inhale microplastics constantly. And it's been shown to be toxic to marine animals, and there's a good chance that it is harmful for us. And one of the main culprits of this problem is PET, polyethylene terephthalate. It's one of the most abundant plastics out there, and it's made out of petroleum sources. So that's one issue with most of the plastic products that we have. They are derived from petroleum resources, and then we just put them back into the environment where they don't get into any sort of a cycle where they can be regenerated. So because of this, we have yet another issue in our hands. And we do use recycling methods, but the recycling methods that we use today are not enough to get rid of the plastics that are accumulating in the landfills. For instance, 80% of the, so 80% is a very optimistic number. 80% of the plastics that we produce end up in the landfill. Say the 20% of this is recycled, half of it go to probably burning trash, and then the other half actually gets recycled. But when it gets recycled, it goes through this process called mechanical recycling, meaning that we heat up the plastic and then remold it. And then while we're doing this, we are losing some of the material properties of these plastics. So in the end, you cannot recycle, for instance, a plastic bottle more than twice. So that's not actually recycling. In the end, everything goes to landfill regardless. And this happens with pretty much every other plastic that we have, not just PET. And mechanical recycling, therefore, is unsustainable. It might be cheap, and in the end, we might feel a little happier about recycling things, but it's not going to help us actually create what we call a circular materials economy. So instead of mechanically recycling plastics, what we would like to do industrially is to chemically recycle. And chemical recycling can be sustainable. What we can do is we can start recycling our plastic, and then we can not mechanically break them down, not heat it up, but use chemical processes to break down the plastic into their building blocks, and then refeed it into a production line and either make more plastics with it, or somehow start a process of energy recovery, so if we can sustainably recycle them, and then feed it into our energy grid. And so these are two ways that we can use plastics to integrate into circular economy. And the idea of circular economy is slowly becoming a little bit more popular in the United States. Europe has already taken significant steps towards making circular economy a reality. America is falling behind a little bit, but the research is here and we're slowly moving towards it. And I know that for a fact that California is probably spearheading this movement in the United States. Now, one way that we can, that I was looking at to use plastics in the circular materials economy is to chemically break down PET bottles, polyethylene terephthalate bottles. And we were inspired by a group of Japanese scientists in 2016 that found an enzyme that was capable of breaking down PET bottles. And this is a very generalized way of saying that they were using plastics to grow. And in order for something to be able to use plastics to grow, they need to have certain enzymes or certain molecular machinery in these microorganisms in order for them to be able to succeed in growing on PET bottles. So the scientists from Japan identified that this microorganism, Ideonella sakaiensis, uses an enzyme called PETase to break things down. And while I'm not going to get into the details of what's happening in this figure, the general idea is that this microorganism sticks to the surface of a PET bottle, and then that microorganism releases an enzyme called PETase, which we depict with these nice little diagrams. And PETase then starts chopping away at the PET bottle, breaks it down into its smaller products. And then a secondary enzyme comes in and eats it more. Then the product of that gets taken up by the cell, and then those products are used to generate energy and growth for the microorganism. So if we can isolate that enzyme PETase and somehow try to industrially scale it up, we can use it to recycle PET bottles a little bit more sustainably, because whatever building blocks that PETase will break the PET bottle into, those things are indeed the materials which we make PET bottles from, so we can actually come full circle. So in this video here, you see a very, very blurry picture of PETase actually eating away at a PET bottle, a green PET bottle, in about 2 weeks or so. And this was before we were able to engineer this particular enzyme for industrial applications. So we learned a lot of things about PETase. We've learned that this red circle here is where all the chemistry of breaking down PET takes place. And we've also learned that in nature, we've identified proteins or enzymes similar to PETase. There was a fungus, for instance, that has an enzyme very similar to PETase, and we kind of used this enzyme to model our own PETase to make PETase a little bit more efficient, well, a little less efficient, because we were just trying to test the theory. So we said, if PETase is better than this particular protein, if we make our protein similar to this, then we would have reduced activity. But when we engineered this particular enzyme to completely destroy it, it surprised us, and we accidentally ended up making this enzyme better. So the way that I set up these experiments was, I just had a tiny little PET coupon. I put it in a plastic tube that was not the kind of plastic that enzyme was able to digest. But when I incubate, or put together the coupon and enzyme together, I saw that without enzyme, I get no reaction. But then with the enzyme, I get a lot of reaction. And then with the mutant that we engineered, we have even better degradation efficiency. And we can actually look at this under a microscope. So under a microscope, we can look at a plastic coupon that has absolutely no enzyme treatment. And then we can look at a plastic coupon that has a little bit of an enzyme treatment. And then we can look at the plastic coupon that has treatment by the mutant, which is the better PETase. And from all of this, we see that mutant performs much better than our initial enzyme. And this made us really hopeful, because it means that we can engineer this enzyme to be better so that we can make it more efficient, and that would help us with industrial scaling. We know that the mutant is better because, we measure mass loss, we measure product release, etc. And I don't want to bore you with, figures here, but what I want to show you is that if we have the secondary enzyme, PETase and METase together, we can achieve even better efficiency. So again, we have no enzyme here, and then the secondary enzyme that I was talking about, by itself, it doesn't do anything. But when it works with PETase, it degrades plastic a lot better. So we can do various enzyme cocktails to indeed make the plastic degradation process a lot more efficient. And all of this research basically helped helped researchers achieve industrial scalability. Now, we tried to make a better metase or the secondary enzyme as well, but we didn't really get too much into detail for it because we wanted to like focus a little bit more on PETase itself. But essentially, all of this can be used in an industrial context. So in France, there is a company called Carbios, which has effectively taken a plastic bottle and it degraded it with a PETase-like enzyme that they engineered. The broken down products were then efficiently recycled back into the plastic, virgin-like plastic bottles. And this is a huge step in moving towards an economy where everything is operating in a circular materials fashion, meaning that nothing is going to waste. And that is, I think, this is a very, very small step. Like when I first defended my dissertation related to this, I had a lot of questions, people asking me, so how long is it going to be till this thing is actually scalable? And I would always, I would always refrain from making such certain statements. I would say things like, oh, in a couple of years it's going to happen. And I defended my dissertation in 2019. Now, it's 2021 June. We had about a year of this pandemic that hindered a lot of progress with respect to this particular project. But in about 2 years, we were able to achieve complete recycling of a PET product back into a PET bottle. And that is really, really hopeful. That means that we can actually start using post-consumer PET products for industrial applicability, and that is really, really exciting for me. Now, I know I ran through all of this, but if there is any questions that you'd like to ask me, I'd be more than happy to answer. And thank you so much.
Thank you, AJ, for that presentation. There is a lot in there, and I do encourage people that are logged in to go ahead, type your questions into the chat. We're going to give Jay Regan a chance to present first on something that is related but different. So Jay is a professor of environmental engineering in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Penn State University, the University Park campus in State College, Pennsylvania. And again, please go ahead, put your questions in the chat. And after Jay takes us through his research, we'll start going through that and have a discussion. So Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Laura. Okay, well, thank you all for attending and for your attention. Trying to get in presentation. Okay, so as Laura introduced, I'm going to talk about some of the work that I'm doing in this industrial sector of the concept of drawdown. And just to give an overview of my research at large, I work in the broad area of environmental biotechnology. I study microbes. I use microbes for waste treatment, kind of some of what AJ talked about there. And specifically, I look at a perspective of recovering energy from waste, recovering or removing nutrients from waste. And I also study microbes in natural ecosystems like soils, streams, wetlands, primarily with respect to how they remove or retain phosphorus and nitrogen in the landscape. And I also, a fair amount of my work is looking at trying to recover novel microbes. It's a field called bioprospecting. So I get to go to neat places like Yellowstone National Park, northern Chile, and sample from extreme environments to try to retrieve novel microbes that can do some of the things that I'll talk to you about here tonight. And Laura showed this in her overview of this is from the Drawdown organization's website. And I just wanted to show there's lots of different aspects to the concept of drawdown, getting to negative or carbon reductions. And so I kind of highlighted the parts of this that intersect with my work. So tonight we're talking about industry, and then there's a lot of overlap among all of these different sectors, but I kind of look in the electricity production using microbes, using agricultural products, biomass, and even using land sinks. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of those in an industry context here tonight. This is a figure that was presented a few years ago in a publication. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot superimposed on this figure, but the key points I want to show here are this is CO2 emissions over time, and the idea of drawdown that Laura talked about is actually not just reducing our carbon emissions, but actually lowering the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that requires eventually getting to negative carbon dioxide emissions to lower it. And so what this shows is kind of the Paris Climate Agreement here is 2015. This solid black line shows net emissions. So that would be produced minus sequester or negative emissions. And the projection here in this model shows reaching drawdown at around 2070 or so. And so to do this really is going to require reducing our emissions, but more than that, if we're going to actually reduce CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, we actually need processes that sequester or have negative carbon emissions. And so I'm going to talk about some ways that we can do that in the space that I work in, which is kind of waste treatment, bioenergy production. I'll start with this idea of reducing emissions, replacing fossil fuels for energy and for products. And then I'll talk just a slide or two on how could we actually get negative emissions from these processes. So one way to get reduced emissions is to kind of wean ourselves off of fossil fuels by thinking of wastes as resources and not wastes. And so this is occurring in a lot of different areas. One of them that I work in is in the wastewater treatment industry. In fact, there's a movement to stop saying wastewater treatment plants and to talk about water resource and recovery facilities. And so about 10 years ago or so, one of the main industry representatives or professional organizations came out with a fact sheet on how do we get net zero energy in wastewater treatment plants. And one of the statements they make in that is that the energy contained in wastewater and biosolids, so this is talking about municipal wastewaters here, it exceeds the energy needed for treatment by about 10-fold. So we use about 2 or 3% of our electricity demand in this country just for water and wastewater treatment and conveyance. A lot of that's pumping. A lot of that is energy spent on aeration to run aerobic processes. And there's about 10 times more energy in the waste than we use to treat it. And so the idea is, how do we invert our paradigm and actually extract energy instead of spending lots of energy while still getting waste treatment? And so that energy is in different forms. There's thermal energy, there's hydraulic energy, so pumping and elevation differences of waters. And then a lot of it is in chemical energy. That's where my work comes in, is how do we take the waste organic materials, and instead of spending energy to treat them, how do we extract energy in that treatment process? And so one of the ways that my group is looking at this is using anaerobic digestion. And that is basically using a consortium of microbes, lots of different microbes, to break down organic material and produce what we call biogas. Biogas is just a methane carbon dioxide mixture. Usually it's something like 50 to 60% methane. The balance is CO2. And so we can do this. This is a farm digester here, a dairy farm. We can do this with municipal solids. We can do this with manures. We can do this with cellulosic materials like corn stover and switchgrass. And so we have a project with the Department of Energy now trying to study the optimization of this process at different temperatures, different pHs, different retention times, looking at the microbes and what they're doing and how we can get them to do those things better. This is a figure that I took from a group headquartered in Italy, where it's a nice graphic that shows the integration of anaerobic digestion, which is here, with kind of a systems-wide thinking. So putting wastes into anaerobic digesters. These are animal waste. These are crop residues, or even bioenergy crops, things like switchgrass grown deliberately for energy production. We use the microbes to break them down into methane and CO2, this biogas product. And then we can produce electricity from that biogas. So that's what this is showing. We can also remove the CO2, purify it to make renewable natural gas that would substitute fossil fuel-based natural gas in the grid. So we call that biomethane here. And then the liquid slurry that is the product of this, which we call digestate, that could be used as a fertilizer to kind of feed back into this cycle. So this is an idea of anaerobic digestion incorporated into a system to try to produce bioenergy and also bioproducts in place of fossil fuel derived energy sources. Another technology that my group works on, and several others here at Penn State are working on, is something called bioelectrochemical systems. And I know there's a lot going on in this figure, but the simple idea of this is there are microbes that can use electrodes as their electron acceptors, the way that you and I use oxygen. We respire oxygen. Some microbes can dump electrons onto an electrode, and we can collect those electrons and produce electricity from that process. And so if this feed is, say, wastewater, we can treat the wastewater and produce a little bit of electricity in the process there. And so these are called bioelectrochemical systems. There's also microbes not shown in this figure that can take electrons from the cathode of this system here too. So these systems are kind of an emerging technology. There are a few companies that are commercializing them now, but definitely they are in the kind of scale up and product development stage. But what I want to show here is just there's lots of potential applications for these bioelectrochemical systems. Waste treatment I talked about. This is a system in Queensland, Australia at the Foster's Brewery there. The Navy is using these as they deploy these out into ocean sediments, and they can use them to be kind of deep sea battery replacements. So they can do oceanographic monitoring without using batteries, without needing divers. They just use microbes eating the organics that are in ocean sediments, producing electricity. We can do all sorts of things at the cathode, remediating uranium contamination, nitrate contamination. We can even use, some microbes can take electrons from a cathode and fix carbon dioxide to make bioproducts like acetate, like butanol, butyrate. And so we could use these systems if we had say a solar panel delivering renewable electricity. We could actually use microbes to fix carbon and make reduced products in these systems. And then another area, there's a lot that I'm not showing here, but another area is using these systems to desalinate water. And so if you use the microbes to produce an electrical current, like I talked about, there's also an ionic current that establishes in here. And if you have the right selection of membranes, you can desalinate water, driven not by something like reverse osmosis, but driven by the activity of these microbes. There's lots of different potential applications of these bioelectrochemical systems. And so I've talked about kind of how do we lower our carbon emissions using technologies, anaerobic technologies like anaerobic digestion, bioelectrochemical systems. That doesn't really get at the issue of how do we actually have negative emissions? How do we move to drawdown with negative emissions? And so this figure also has a lot going on. I just want to highlight the key point that I'm trying to make here is what this figure is showing is carbon. This is a carbon scale. NPP is net primary productivity. So this is land management strategies that deliberately produce biofuel resources like switchgrass and miscanthus and other bioproducts that we can use for biofuel production. Some of the carbon that is involved in that net primary productivity gets respired by microbes in the soil and released back to the atmosphere. That's this one. But some can be used for fuel production. And so that's what this arrow is showing. So this gray arrow is the basically the fossil fuel equivalent. So the displaced fossil fuel use due to producing fuels from biomass material. And then this last arrow here is what I want to show is this is actually carbon storage. So carbon capture and storage. So this sequestration part here. And so this could actually contribute to negative carbon emissions, as these plants have lots of their mass is actually in the subsurface in the roots, and they actually store carbon, removing it from the atmosphere. So this is one way that we could potentially move into a negative carbon scenario, a drawdown scenario. And so this shows just kind of a graphic of the possibilities here. Collecting biomass from a variety of resources. Municipal solid waste is part of that, but also algae, crop residues, tree products, and producing not only energy, but other products that we currently derive from fossil fuels. Maybe the plastic materials that AJ talked about. There's groups looking at converting biomass derived carbon into plastic precursors and plastic products. And so this would be kind of moving in the direction of negative emissions and carbon drawdown. So thanks for your attention, and I will stop sharing here and hopefully have an opportunity to answer some questions here.
And thank you for that, Jay. And we definitely have questions coming in the chat. I have some that have been emailed to me, and we have some that came in on the registration form. So what I'd like to do first, though, I've done this with each month's session. I think it's kind of fun. I know I've served on panels before where I've listened to other panelists and I have questions that I wish I could ask them. So I thought I would give each of you a chance to start with, to see if AJ, you have any questions for Jay you would like to ask him, and the same for you, Jay, if you have any specific questions you'd like to follow up with AJ
on. Nothing yet. I guess I'll have to think a little bit more about it before anything.
Yeah, I guess, AJ, I don't know if any of your work has gotten into, I alluded at the very end about these, bio-derived plastic precursors and products. Do you do any work in that space, or?
We've looked into a little bit. I was gonna be a part of that project, but during the pandemic, obviously things have changed a little bit. But one of the interesting enough, one of the projects that I was first starting with was engineering of organisms, especially Pseudomonas putida, to produce bio-derived plastics from sources like glucose. So just by using glucose, we can make what my group has called performance advantaged materials, to materials that are really similar to things like polyethylene terephthalate or nylon 6,6, which is used in, it's just used to make Kevlar, or adipic acid, beta ketoadipate, which are like precursors to like really, really important industrially applicable materials. Or we also looked at using carbon sources only to make chemicals that can be used as additives in solar and wind panels and stuff like that. So there was a lot of there's a lot of research that my previous group has done on that for sure. And I'm sure his name has come across in your studies. His name is Dr. Greg Beckham, and he has done I've worked with him, and he has done a lot of work under for generation of materials from reusable sources.
Yeah, lignin derived things. Right?
Exactly, lignin derivation and basically any cellobios based material.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's go ahead and start going through some of the questions that have come in. So I'll start with the first one here in the chat. What happens when you recycle an already recycled plastic item based on the point of not being able to recycle plastic more than once?
That's a great question. So that's where the problem of plastics recycling comes in. When we're recycling plastic, what we do is we take it to a recycling facility. In that recycling facility, the plastic gets sorted by what kind of plastic it is. Not all plastics are the same. And they are sorted by their density, by their properties, et cetera. And after they're sorted, according to what they are, they're heated up. When we heat them up and then cool them back down, we lose what we call material properties. So for polyethylene terephthalate, PET, one desirable property is gas barrier properties. So gas barrier property is how much gas within it's able to contain. So if you're making a Coke bottle, for instance, you want that Coke bottle to not leak any of the carbon dioxide that is in the Coke, because that's one of the reasons why Coke is so bubbly, right? So if you recycle a PET bottle mechanically, you won't be able to use it as a bottle again. So you're losing, for instance, that gas barrier property, and that's not a desirable thing, right? So that's why we say we cannot recycle it for a second time, because when we recycle a plastic bottle, we can't use it again as a plastic bottle. What we can use it for is something like a carpet or carpet fibers or like clothing. So that's why I use the term you can't recycle it again, or that's why I say that recycling plastics is not entirely sustainable.
Thank you. And I'll jump to a question for Jay. You had shown an image that talked about using waste from farms and from animals, but we have a question: why isn't human waste included in the cycle that you showed?
If you're talking about that kind of system-wide figure that I showed, I didn't generate that figure. If I had, I definitely would have had human waste generating or feeding into the digester too. So that was showing manures and crop residues. Typically with anaerobic digestion, or I should say conventionally, it has been used for the treatment of sludges produced in wastewater treatment. So oftentimes we have an aerobic process for treatment. We generate this sludge material, and that is fed into a digester. But there are a lot of groups looking at using digestion on municipal wastewater is very dilute compared to sludge and manures. And so there are groups looking at making it work effectively on those dilute streams. So there's a lot going on in that process, but one alternative is to not use as much dilution water as well. So so that if we had more decentralized waste treatment facilities, we wouldn't need as much conveyance water and these anaerobic digestion systems would work better. But certainly it is for human waste too. That figure, I'm not sure why they didn't have an arrow going from the people up to the digester, but I would put an arrow in there. Yeah, thank you.
And Jay, maybe I could follow up. This is a popular question we usually get. How did you end up doing this as a career? Because I'm sure when you were younger, you did not say, when I grow up, I want to work with, and this field probably wasn't really there at the time you were going through school. I have a feeling this is much more recent development with science. So could you just talk a little bit about your career trajectory and,
Sure.
and what interests and drives you in working in this area?
Sure. Anaerobic digestion was definitely a mature field when I was going to school. Bioelectrochemical systems, that second technology I talked about, that's a much more recent thing that's maybe 20 years old now. But I actually wanted to be a farmer as a kid. I worked on a chicken farm and I wanted to be a farmer. And I went to school as an agricultural engineer. That's my undergraduate degree. And in that space, which is pretty diverse, there's power and machinery and water and waste. But I was kind of drawn to the environmental side of that, the idea of taking wastes and treating them to make clean water. So that was kind of my driver. I don't know how weird that makes me, but I was motivated by getting into a field that involved producing clean water. And so that was water treatment and wastewater treatment. And then maybe the past 20 years or so, it's kind of moved into extracting energy in that process. So not just accomplishing the waste treatment goal, but exploiting the fact that those wastes have lots of energy in them. So the idea of energy neutral waste treatment, that would have huge global implications, you know, in countries that aren't able to or aren't going to do the infrastructure that we have that's very energy intensive. If they could just break even with their waste treatment with simple decentralized systems, that would be a huge global sanitation accomplishment. So that's kind of what motivated me to get into this, the idea of producing clean water.
Your description just makes it sound so exciting, which is wonderful.
Yeah, my kids don't think so, but yeah.
AJ, do you mind giving us your story and your journey into your work?
Yeah, of course. I'm from Istanbul, Turkey originally. I was born and raised there, and I went to I come from a family that are not scientists, but my mother was a science teacher, and my love for chemistry kind of, grew with her. And I went into chemical and biological engineering in my undergraduate, and I was in Istanbul Technical University. And one day I find myself in Montana State University doing an exchange program. Totally my last choice, but I realized that Montana was beautiful, and a lot of the environmental science that was happening in Montana State University and the kinds of discoveries that were being done in Yellowstone National Park was just really exciting for me. So I decided to move towards environmental biochemistry myself. And it was the love for, the mountains and the beauty around me after going from a city of, 15 million people that kind of helped me understand that I need to be doing science that is related to helping the environment. And that's why I went into environmental biochemistry.
Your passions are so similar, that different journeys, but still have the same end goal in a way. So that's wonderful. AJ, if I could ask you one of the other questions from the chat here, what would happen if you put the enzymes, the PETase and METase, in the ocean?
In small concentrations, I don't think PETase and METase would be too effective in helping us addressing any sort of plastics problem. We would need to put a lot of PETase and METase in the ocean. But say that we can, I think in the end, I wouldn't think that it would be a sustainable option, because the building blocks of PET is ethylene glycol and what we call another chemical that we call terephthalic acid. And these could be very, very toxic really quickly to a lot of organisms. So what we would need to do is engineer organisms. That's why microbial engineering is very, very important. We want to engineer organisms not only that can not only degrade these plastics, but we want to be able to make sure that the degradation products are not toxic to anything else. So there's a lot of work that's being done on this, but most recent one that I know of, they recently engineered an organism to create biofilms on the sediments of the ocean, which can effectively capture microplastics in the ocean. and then they use this net-like structure that they make themselves to keep all the microplastics and the degradation products in the biofilm itself. And then we can take out the biofilm created biofilm and then separate the degradation products and microplastics from the ocean that way. So instead of just putting the enzymes in the ocean, what we want to do is engineer microbes that can trap the plastic, trap the degradation products, and then we take the degradation products from the microbes.
Thank you for that. And since it is National Ocean Month, we'll ask one more ocean question that came in. Jay, this one's for you. How do carbon sequestration rates for biomass compare to carbon sequestration deep underground and in the deep ocean?
I don't know. I don't know those numbers. They're not mutually exclusive things. I'll say that. When we talk about, in that graphic, that farm graphic that I didn't produce, they had biogas production, and they had renewable natural gas being sent back into the natural gas grid. That requires CO2 removal from biogas, and something has to be done with that CO2. So they are interconnected to some extent, but I'm sorry, I don't know the comparison of the rates for what we call bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, versus the other things you mentioned here, the ocean and underground. I'll need to look into that. I should know those numbers.
Well, I know certainly within Project Drawdown, they categorize their solution sectors by sources and by sinks, and the sinks, they say there's so much more modeling that needs to be done, that's an area that we still have a lot to learn that we haven't studied as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's true in the area I work, which is kind of the plant-based sequestration. There's a lot of questions still about how permanent that is, how much of it gets respired, reoxidized, you know, how reliable is that for storage? And that's true of the others as well. The deep underground injections and things is the permanency. So yeah, I thank you for rescuing me with that, Laura, but we need to study that more.
Plenty of science to do, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So the Delaware County Institute of Science is located in Media, Pennsylvania, and a question has come in from the Media Zero Waste Committee. Several points actually they would like to bring up. So they've been going through something called the Gaia Zero Waste document, and they wanted to know if either of the presenters can address some of the issues that's been brought up there. One of the issues is that most bio-based plastic includes much fossil fuel-based plastic. Another point is bio-based plastic comes from agricultural land, precluding food growing there. And another point is many compostable takeout containers have PFAs in them, which are highly toxic. So I don't know if either of you want to tackle any of those points.
I'll take, I think only a part of it pertains to what I talked about. The second part I think about bio-based plastics using food resources and the competition there. You know, there are other sources of the organics that can be used for bio-based plastics. We kind of hinted at it earlier with cellulosic material, lignin, which is oftentimes kind of thought of as a waste. It's very hard to break down and things, but there are microbes that can convert that into bioplastic type products. And so you don't have to use food resources for that. You can use woody materials in a place like Pennsylvania where we are, lots of resources besides food. You can use bioenergy crops, things like, not food-based, but things like switchgrass grown in marginal lands that wouldn't be used or shouldn't be used for food-based agricultural activities. So for example, riparian buffer zones on streams is an example where you wouldn't want to plant food products there, but you can plant bioenergy crops there. And the reason I asked my question to AJ earlier about if she worked on biorenewable plastics is that is also something groups are studying from municipal wastewaters. There are microbes that can store inside their cell biodegradable plastic precursors. They're called polyhydroxyalkanoates, and they generate those from waste organics in municipal wastewater or agricultural wastewater. So not at all using food resources to make those products. The first and the third questions, I don't know the answers to. Maybe AJ does.
I guess if you could repeat the questions, that would be great too, so that I can at least give a more coherent answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is most bio-based plastic includes much fossil fuel-based plastic?
Yes,
And
it does. It does, but I think thinking about plastics that are coming from fossil sources is a bad thing. It's not the right thinking that we should have. The right thinking that we should have is that, can we reuse this material over and over and over again, is a good question. If we can't completely degrade this particular plastic in the environment by itself, then can we take it and make something better with it, or can we reuse it by using different industrial processes, is a good question. So if we have some sort of a plastic that we can break down by a consumer, and then that gets taken out and then recirculated, if it's put back into circulation to be used again, that's not a net negative overall. I think that would be a really, really positive outcome, even though the plastic is not entirely biodegradable. I don't know if that's, that's probably, like I said, we do use a lot of fossil fuel sources, but we still need fossil fuel for a lot of things. The materials that we have around us, probably some of them do not have bio-based alternatives, unfortunately. A lot of the fossil fuel products that we use can still be reused. We just need to figure out innovative ways of trying to reuse them.
And then the final comment that came in, many compostable takeout containers have PFAs in them, which are highly toxic. I think you agreed with that.
Yeah. I have a question too for AJ. Does anyone talk about plastics mining? With all the plastics we have historically made, if what you presented, we can do it in feasible, economically feasible strategies.
I think that's where things are going to go, essentially. I think because there's not only so much energy stored in these plastic materials, but there's also, again, a lot of potential for making virgin plastics with them too. So I think plastic mining from landfills at some point is going to be a very real thing.
I want to just quickly jump. I'm going to share my screen for a sec to because many times we always like to say, well, what can the individual person do? So what role do individuals have that are not part of these large research projects or research laboratories? And for those of you that are not familiar with the Drawdown Eco Challenge, I encourage you to visit this website. Drawdown Eco Challenge is actually a series of actions that you can take, and sometimes teams join up. DCIS has a team that's part of it, and when you look at their categories of solutions, their categories actually map right on to the different sectors that Project Drawdown has. So as we're discussing industry this evening, I can click on industry, and there are numerous options here. And again, you don't have to sign up for an account on their website, but if you want to track points and make this a friendly competition with family members or friends or community groups, but for example, just encouraging your company or organization to look at their carbon footprint, looking at the carbon footprint of your own house. These are, again, action items you can take, learning about carbon offsets. So educating ourselves into what's going on is also very important. Listening to podcasts about it, finding a climate-friendly supermarket that is local. Clothing was also brought up earlier, and learning about and practicing sustainable fashion is another one too. There is so much waste that is generated in the fashion industry. Recycling, and this list goes on, recycled paper, going paperless. So I encourage you to check out the Drawdown Eco Challenge and thinking about how you can also play a part in getting us towards some of these solutions to address what's going on with greenhouse gases and our changing climate. So with that, and we're getting close to the end of our time here. Jay and AJ, do you have any last comments or any last closing thoughts you'd like to share with the group?
One thing that I have learned from my previous boss, he did this game in front of the Congress. He encourages people to play the no plastic game, which is think about doing something and throughout your day where you use absolutely no plastics at all. And that's a really difficult game if you think about it. Plastics are everywhere. And like I said, a life without plastics is at this point impossible, but there's always sustainable ways of using plastics. And that's what we need to be doing moving forward. Not think about a world without plastic, but thinking about a world with plastic that is as sustainable as possible.
My thought is pretty similar to what you just said, AJ. I noticed, Laura, as you were scrolling through, it had the 5 R's, practice the 5 R's. And we don't often think about the first one that was on that list, which was refuse, right? So before we know the 4 R's, but there's a 5th one in their list, and it's refuse. So it's giving some deliberate thought to your use of plastics, energy, carbon, water, all of those things are interconnected. So kind of challenging our typical thoughts of what we do and saying, I don't need to do this thing, you know, or I can choose to do this thing differently than I've always done it.
Thank you both for your time, your presentations this evening, and this great discussion. I'm sure there's so many more questions we could ask. This, again, is being recorded, this session. We will be posting it and sharing it as soon as we can. DCIS lectures will be taking a break now for the remainder of the summer. Look back in the fall. We will have a full slate of speakers going on, again, monthly lectures that are open to the entire public. We will have a mix of in-person and virtual opportunities. We've been excited to be able to share the expertise, not just with everyone here in Media, Pennsylvania, but throughout the state. And actually, we've had people logging in from other states as well. So thank you both again for your time this evening. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Have a wonderful night.
Good night.